Jada Thacker is with us. Jada is a history teacher and the author of Dissecting American History, a theme-based narrative, writing over at consortiumnews.com and reprinted over at alternet.org. An absolutely brilliant piece. Alternet had titled it, and I'm guessing this was a retitle, although maybe not, Concept of Limited Government as Right-Wing Bunk. Try to find anything remotely like it in the Constitution. Jada, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Glad to be here.
Or Dr. Thacker, I should say.
Yeah.
Indeed. So we've been hearing this meme for the better part of 30 years now, ever since Ronald Reagan said that America is the problem, not the solution, or at least American government, this form of government that George Washington had 3 horses shot out from underneath him trying to create was somehow the problem, and that smaller government is better, that government that governs least governs best, paraphrasing Thomas Jefferson. Isn't this in the Constitution?
Well, the problem is we have a national myth that circulates American history. And part of that myth is that under the original documents that founded this country, that, everyone was free and there was liberty and all was right in the world. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of interests now that want to try to take us back and say, no, we should go back to those original, the original founding documents, because that's where all our liberty was, because before these terrible progressive people came and took all our freedoms away. And that's just not the case at all. What we had was a situation that, the founders, the guys that wrote the Constitution, among them, there were no wage earners, there were no people of color, there were no women. These basically were the 1%ers of their day, and they were arranging the situation to benefit their interests, and they did.
Yeah, and they did not establish a limited government. I mean, this is the thing that I found most interesting. Alexander Hamilton, in his report to Congress on manufactures in 1791, when he was the Secretary of the Treasury, he's talking about the general welfare, and he was one of the guys at the Constitutional Convention. I mean, he stormed off in a huff for a while, but he was there. And he writes, the terms general welfare were doubtless intended to signify more than was expressed or imported in those which preceded. Otherwise, numerous exigencies incident to the affairs of a nation would have been left without a provision. The phrase is as comprehensive as any that could have been used, because it was not fit that the constitutional authority of the Union to appropriate its revenue should have been restricted within narrower limits than the general welfare. He has that in quotes. And because this necessarily embraces a vast variety of particulars which are susceptible neither to specification nor definition. It is therefore of a necessity left to the discretion of the national legislature to pronounce upon the objects which concern the general welfare. And then he goes on from there. But basically he's saying, the Constitution, when it comes to determining the size of government, the role of government, is almost a blank check.
Well, it was. And Hamilton was among those that wrote it that way. The issue of, the discretion of the federal government was hotly debated during the convention. Unfortunately, and I've gotten a lot of this since the publication of my piece, is that, I have people telling me, hey, look, and then they want to trot out all of these quotes from the Federalist Papers.
Right.
And they are not understanding that the Federalist Papers were not written by a bunch of disinterested policy wonks. These were papers that Hamilton and Jay and Madison wrote as partisan lawyers.
This was a sales pitch for the Constitution, for the ratification of the Constitution.
Arguing to get their point, and they got their point when they got the Constitution ratified.
Right.
So it's all well and good for people to sit around and say, well, what was the intent of this and the intent of that? But whatever people were promised, whatever they thought when they heard these arguments or read them, those promises and those arguments were not ratified when the Constitution was ratified. The words of the Constitution were what were ratified, and those words give the federal government just as much power the day it was ratified as it possesses today.
Right. So what do you say to particularly the Tea Partiers who say, well, what about the enumerated powers? Article 1, Section 8 lists a bunch of things like post office roads, there's armies, there's specific things the government can do.
Well, I say, yeah, let's go back to Article 1, Section 8, because the very first clause there says that Congress shall have the power to provide for the general welfare of the country.
It takes us back to Hamilton's argument.
Defined, but that is the term that is used in the Constitution. If you skip to the last clause of Article 1, Section 8, it says that's the necessary and proper clause, that Congress shall have the power to make all laws necessary and proper in order to do all of the foregoing. Those two clauses, the first and last of Article 1, Section 8, are bookends.
Right.
And when you put those bookends together, it basically says that Congress has the power to write any legislation that they want to.
Right. The limit on that power, to paraphrase Jefferson, is the people themselves. The people can say, we don't like the way Congress is writing laws, so we're going to vote the bums out and vote some bums in who won't do that. And
exactly. And that's why democratically limited government is absolutely necessary if this system's going to work. Some people have misconstrued what I've said to say that I am arguing for unlimited government. But that's crazy. Nobody thinks totalitarianism is a good idea. I'm just saying that the people that want to suggest, well, if we just could go back to the way the government was the day the Constitution was ratified, all our problems would be solved.
No more blacks voting, no more women voting.
Exactly.
Indentured.
The vast majority of the public was disenfranchised at that time. It took them 100 years to change that.
Right. Arguably more than that. The 10th Amendment. We have just a minute left. Your take on the 10th Amendment?
The 10th Amendment simply says that any powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states and the people, respectively. Now, that is taken to mean, there's important powers that were not given to the federal government that are now inherent in the states. Well, that's not what the 10th says. If you read it carefully, it says powers not delegated. It didn't say they hadn't already been delegated.
Right.
So the powers, principally the powers in Article 1, Section 8 that we were talking about, those had already been bestowed upon Congress 4 years before the 10th Amendment was ratified. So the 10th Amendment was, they just closed the pasture gate after the horses were already out.
Brilliant article. Dr. Jada Thacker. Hang on just a second here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The article, Concept of Limited Government is Right-Wing Bunk. You can read it over Consortium News or Alternet. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Great talking with you.